Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Alpha's Scarlet Secret. Synopsis. This is not fair. She moaned, overwhelmed by pleasure. You desire me just as intensely as I desire you. Succumb to your cravings, sweetheart, and I'll make you feel so unbelievably good that you will never want another man to touch you. He breathed softly. That was her greatest fear, that once he was finished with her, she would be left shattered. Scarlett Malone was a spirited and determined young she-wolf, favored by the moon goddess as the first alpha female. Relocating to a new town with her mother to begin anew, they were embraced by a fresh pack and a new family. Complications arose when she started to develop feelings for her clever stepbrother, the future alpha of the Blood Moon pack. Will she manage to conquer the forbidden thoughts that invade her mind and awaken a deep pleasure within her? Or will she push even her own limits and explore the illicit feelings that ignited within her? Elijah Westwood, the most sought-after boy around, and one that all the girls dreamed of experiencing. A flirt who didn't believe in love or mates. He was 21 and had no hurry to find his destined partner, relishing life as it was, with an endless supply of women to bed. What occurs when he returns home only to find that he has started to see his stepsister in a different way? Aware that when the mating ceremony arrived, she would locate her mate. Will he struggle against everything for her, or will he allow her to go? Episode 1. Scarlet. Please hurry up, I don't want your brother having to wait so long. Jessica shouted up the stairs to her daughter. KK mama. I know, relax. She called back. Scarlet rolled her eyes, applying her trademark red lipstick. If you got it, why not flaunt it? She thought to herself as she stared in the mirror at her reflection. Staring back at her was a beautiful young woman with strawberry choppy shoulder length which was dyed in an ombre style, the bottom half a vivid red. Plumping up her hair, she stood up and grabbed her car keys. She loved being 18, having received her car from her mother and stepfather on her birthday a few months ago. Despite turning 18, the age that most young werewolves found their mates, Scarlet had not. She didn't worry too much about it. After all, their pack wasn't too big and her mate could be anywhere in the world. For now, she'd simply focus on herself. She had felt her wolf awaken, felt her presence in her mind, and had shifted to a magnificent grey wolf. It had been bigger than most wolves in their town, something that had caused rumors to spread around the town. No one knew her mother's mate had been an alpha. But her wolf had been a dead giveaway to that. She rushed out of her room, almost bumping into her 14-year-old sister Indigo. Careful, Indigo snapped, earning herself a glare from Scarlet. I'm getting late, Indy. I have to collect Elijah from the airport, she said, running down the steps, taking 2 at a time and skipping the last 4. Her feet hitting the dark wooden floorboards with a thud. Scarlet, calm down, Jessica said, stepping out of the mansion kitchen. She had an apron on and her black hair pulled into a messy bun. From the splashes of flour, Scarlet noted she must have been working on another cake order. Despite being a werewolf, Jessica was a well-known and in-demand baker in Stratford-upon-Avon. It was something that kept her busy and her mind off things. Despite being the Luna to the Blood Moon pack, Jessica was not fully acknowledged by the pack members. It had been years since they had joined their pack after the first Luna was killed in a rogue attack which had left the pack devastated. When Jessica had stepped into the broken alpha's life, the pack had mixed emotions, with some glad that their alpha would not go insane after the loss of his Luna and others uncertain if anyone could replace their alpha's mate, finding her entering his life a disrespect to their previous Luna. Make up your mind. Do you want me to hurry or not? Scarlet said, not waiting for a reply as she rushed from the house, crossing the green lawn and getting into her white Ford Fiesta. Scarlet lived near the beautiful town of Stratford-upon-Avon with woods surrounding their pack area. It was a small place but with plenty of open grounds, perfect for their pack, the Blood Moon. Most of the pack members lived in the pack area, but some lived in the town amongst the humans and would come to the woods for a run or pack meetings. The alpha, Jackson Westwood, was her stepfather and owned the area. He had his own businesses that helped support the pack financially. Despite his pack only having around 500 members, he was still a strong and fair alpha. The sun was high in the sky and she lowered her window slightly, putting some EDM music on. Tapping the steering wheel with her freshly painted nails. It was roughly a 5-minute drive to Birmingham, the closest airport to their town, and she was glad for the time to mentally prepare to see him again. Sighing, she leant back in her seat. Elijah Westwood, the son of her stepfather, the future alpha of the Blood Moon pack. She had not seen him for the last 2 years. It was 2 summers ago when he had visited from his extensive alpha training around the country. That was when she had realized she was crushing on her own stepbrother. The very thought made her internally cringe. A thought she would not dare utter aloud. She felt nervous now, wondering if those feelings would be gone. She hoped so, not wanting things to become awkward between them. Although Elijah was not the nicest towards her, always teasing, taunting, or trying to embarrass her. She had been so glad when he first left town 5 years ago, thinking good riddance. But when he had returned 2 summers ago, she had seen him completely differently. Now, with his training complete, and returning home permanently, he would become alpha soon enough whilst Jackson would step down. She always knew Elijah was a very handsome young man. He had delicious chocolate locks with natural streaks lightened by the sun and those piercing blue eyes. She muttered, "Do not let yourself go down that train of thought, Scarlet. Not now. Not ever." The airport was a rush with people leaving and entering, taxis and cars parked all around. She struggled to find a parking space before squeezing herself into a very tight spot, then realizing she could not open her side door. Groaning in frustration, she climbed over to the passenger seat and got out. She had failed 4 tests before passing, and bay parking was still not one of her strong points. Entering the airport, she scanned the flight information display. The flight had landed 30 minutes ago. She pouted, crossing her arms, hoping she wasn't too late. "It did take time to collect your luggage, right? Finally. Why am I not surprised?" A drawling voice came from behind her. She spun around, knocking into someone. "Ouch! That hurt!" Scarlet groaned. Massaging her breast, she looked up to glare at the brick-like man she had just knocked into, freezing when she looked into her stepbrother's face. The scent of winter spice, vanilla, and white musk enveloped her senses. "Need some help massaging that?" he asked, his eyes flitting down to her breasts. She blushed, glaring at him. "Oh, shut up, Elijah," she replied, rolling her eyes. "What's wrong? Can't Big Brother take care of his precious little sister?" He mocked. His words ignited a forbidden pleasure within her. I promise to take good care of you. Just say the word red. His breath tickled her ear, her heart pounded in her chest. She shoved him away from her, trying not to notice the way his chest felt under her fingers. He looked incredible, then she remembered, had he grown a little more? Towering over 6 foot, he was definitely a lot bulkier than before. His skin was tanned and a light stubble covered his jaw. Dressed in ripped jeans, a white t-shirt, a leather jacket and Nike trainers, he looked effortlessly good. He was the typical alpha male, drop-dead gorgeous. Stop, it's clear you haven't changed, she said, glaring at him. He looked down at her. She smelled delicious. You've changed a lot though. I was starting to think that all the posts were photoshopped and edited. Clearly not, he said, his eyes trailing over her 5'2" frame and taking in her curves. She was on the smaller side for a she-wolf, but he liked it. Trying not to linger on the way her black top stretched at the bust, paired with blue skinny jeans and black heels boots, she looked effortlessly hot. She did not look like a young girl anymore, now grown into a hot woman. That much was for sure, he was not blind to deny that. He wasn't blind, and no matter who she was, he couldn't deny it. If you're done being annoying, shall we go? I don't have all day, she said, leading the way out. Elijah smirked as he followed her, his eyes falling on her. She really did fill out nicely. I only have selfies or food pictures of her. Summer was sure going to be fun. They reached the car soon after and she unlocked it, opening the boot for him. He tossed in his suitcase and duffel bag, walking around to the passenger seat. Wait, let me get in first, she said. He raised an eyebrow. What? Did you smash in the other door? No, the parking spot was tight, she said, sliding in and over to the driver's seat before he got in. A rich white floral scent filled the car, hers. The parking spot was fine, you parked wrong, he remarked as she started the car. Belt up, Scarlet said, ignoring his remark. Worried for me? He teased, smirking when she glared at him. No, but it's my car, so my rules, she said, reversing out of the spot, very aware of his observation. He ignored her, refusing to put the belt on, fiddling with her playlist. Sitting back when Orna by Samo began playing. She kept her eyes on the road, trying not to focus on the words of the song. The words a little too much, and with Elijah in the car. The image in her head was not a decent one. So how come you were sent to get me? He asked, looking over at the feisty redhead. Last-minute meeting with some alpha popped up and you know, Dad, work comes first, she replied, making Elijah frown. It irked him when she called his dad, Dad. Makes sense, he said, not letting his annoyance show. Why didn't you just run the rest of the way back? She asked. Her wolf seemed to agree with her. Although having a wolf, you did not have a second voice in your head, you could feel their emotions and sense their opinions. Like a second conscience. Luggage, darling, he said tauntingly, earning a frown from the young woman. What about Jessica, busy baking? Yep, I thought she didn't have anything today, but some last-minute order came in and, like they say, what was the point of buying me a car if I can't be of some use? Elijah smirked. I agree, freeloader. he said, poking the side of her head, making her glare at him once again. I am not a freeloader, I help at the restaurant on weekends, and I'm working at a salon too, she said, her glare fading. Unlike Elijah, the smart intelligent pride of the family, she had been a disappointment. Doing a beauty course in college, she went on to apply at a local human salon. Something her parents had not been happy about, wanting her to get a degree like Elijah, who aside from his alpha duties had a business degree under his belt. Cool. I like the hair, it suits you, he said. Growing up she had gone from purples to blues, and pinks, but this was the reddest he had seen it and it looked pretty hot on her. Thanks, she said suspiciously. So are you hungry? Shall we stop at a service station? Yeah, let's. I'm starved, you know the food on the plane is not edible, he said, pushing his seat as far back as possible and stretching his long legs a little. It isn't so bad, she said, amused. She kept her eyes open for a sign that told them a service station was approaching. It was 20 minutes later, and both walked into the service station. Ordering some McDonald's, Elijah carried the tray to the table. I can't believe you can still eat 4 Big Macs, she said, staring at his abs. He was an alpha after all, and guess with all the working out he needed it. I'm a big boy, Red, I need fuel, he replied as they took a seat opposite each other. She took her fish fillet meal and, unwrapping her burger, looked across at him. Once again, her stomach did a flip when their eyes met. Are you still single? Or have you found a man that can tame that temper of yours? He asked, biting into his burger, thinking he doubted she was single. Boys had always found her hot. But it was her feisty temper that never got them far. But looking at her now, there was no way she was single. And he knew she had not found her mate, or there would have been a mark on her neck. Very funny, Elijah. How about you? Are you still a boy, or have you found your mate who can tame your wild ways? She asked, avoiding his question as she imitated the tone he had used. Knowing he hadn't, or the entire pack would have known. Elijah smirked. I like my wild ways, there are no rules when it comes to me, he said, leaning forward as he winked at her. Her heart thudded in her chest. What does that even mean? She asked, sipping her drink. Figure it out, Red, figure it out, Elijah said. His eyes fell on those red lips of hers, the way they wrapped around that straw. The way she licked her lips. He frowned. What was his problem? She was his stepsister, and he was checking her out a little too much. He needed to get a woman tonight, release all the pent-up energy he seemed to have inside of him. Wasn't there a blood moon like a month ago? He asked after a moment. For werewolves, they could only find their mate on a blood moon. Something that occurred 2 nights in a year. It was on these nights that the bond snapped into place, as long as your mate was nearby. Yes, there was, she said, curtly frowning at her burger. If she had found her mate, perhaps these stupid feelings would have gone away. They were back on the road. With 20 minutes left before they got home. Elijah was bopping his knee to the music. Every now and then his gaze going to the feisty redhead in the driver's seat. Her choppy red hair hiding half her face, as she moved her body to the music. Suddenly, he saw a blur flash past the car. Watch out! He shouted, grabbing the steering wheel, and jerking it to the left. Scarlet let out a startled scream as she was thrown into him. The car flipped over as something big hit the car. A crunch of metal made Scarlet wince, feeling a painful ache in her waist until she felt a hand that sent pleasant tingles through her when he touched her there. "Red, you're bleeding," he murmured, receiving a groan of pain in response. "Hush, I got you." Kicking the door off its hinges, he rolled out, cradling her body to his chest. Standing up, he looked at the 3 wolves that stood there growling. He could smell they weren't rogues. 2 were rather big, definitely a beta and a delta. "What do you want?" Elijah asked icily, moving Scarlet behind him defensively. His large body covering her much smaller one. The largest wolf shifted into a young man. Wearing nothing, and not even fazed by it. Something that was normal with werewolves. He looked around 21. His sharp brown eyes met Elijah's blue ones. A sharp wind blew past them, rustling the grass on the roadsides. Leave her, and you are welcome to pass," he said. Scarlet froze. Why did they want her? Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You're talking to a alpha. I don't obey orders. I give them," he growled, his voice deepening. The man raised his hand, stepping back. "I get that, but can I speak to her?" he asked tersely. Elijah growled again, ready to shift, but Scarlet placed a hand on his arm and stepped out from behind him. "Scarlet," the man said, making her frown. "It's Cade. You may not remember me, but I sure as hell can recognize those green eyes anywhere." Scarlet froze, her heart thumping. Cade. There was only one Cade she knew, and he should be 100 miles away in her father's pack. Her heart thumped in her chest. Elijah looked at her sharply. He could hear the thudding in her chest and smell the fear in the air. He placed a hand instinctively around her waist, pulling her close, glaring at Cade threateningly. "Mates?" Cade asked, making Scarlet blush despite the seriousness of the situation. "Maybe," Elijah growled, feeling a strong sense of possessiveness the way Cade was looking at her and talking to her. "Can someone share how you two know each other?" "He's from my old pack," Scarlet said quietly, very aware of every ridge of his body, her chest pressed against his. Elijah looked momentarily surprised. "And you need to return and take your place," Cade said, watching them calmly, realizing they did not smell the same. And from what he could see, neither was marked. "I'm the new beta, the beta that will take his place by your just leave. I don't want anything to do with that pack. Now leave before I tear you all to pieces," she growled, her eyes flashing dangerously. Only Jackson knew her father was an alpha, despite all the rumors since the night of her first shift. But they had wanted to keep it a secret. The fact that her father had traced them this far meant he knew exactly where they were living. Cade frowned, signaling to the 2 wolves by his side to attack. Scarlet turned ready to fight, a spasming pain ricocheting up her side, but the wolves were aiming for Elijah, who had shifted into a magnificent light brown wolf. His fur was glossy. He was huge, bigger than before. Scarlet thought in awe. He clearly stood over 5 feet in height on all fours, and he was larger than any alpha wolf Scarlet had seen before. He lunged at the wolves before they even got to him, biting into one of their necks as he ripped it clean off the body. Blood splattered everywhere, his paw slashing through the other wolf's chest. When the first wolf fell to the ground dead, shifting into the body of a decapitated human, Cade must have mind-linked something to the second wolf, who quickly retreated. Elijah shifted to his human form, a strong aura surrounding him, his alpha power emanating from him. Tell your alpha, there's no way he's getting Scarlet. Whatever his reasons, try to attack or reach out to her one more time and I will take it as a personal attack. You don't want to get on the wrong side of future Alpha Elijah Westwood of the Blood Moon Pack, and we're ready for war. He said, his voice was dangerous and deep. Cade frowned and nodded, casting one last glance at Scarlet. You can't run from your birthright, he mumbled before turning, shifting, and running off. Scarlet took a deep breath, and it was then she realized that Elijah was stood in front of her. He turned, and she quickly closed her eyes. Clothes! She shrieked. Elijah raised an eyebrow, looking down. What are you, a baby? Never seen before? He asked, thinking she had no problem with that other guys on show. Of course I have. I just don't want to be traumatized for life by seeing yours, she said, wincing at the sting of pain in her side. Whatever you say, Red, every woman would beg to get one look at mine. His reply came. I'm your sister, remember? She retorted, her eyes still averted, knowing if she looked, she would just have even more vivid images to dream over. He did not reply, flipping the wrecked car onto all fours and opening the boot. Taking out his duffel bag, he pulled on a pair of pants. You can look now, prude, he remarked, walking over to her as she rolled her eyes. Knowing she was hiding something. He had not missed how she had cut the guy off, or the fear that rolled off her. But now was not the time to ask. Reaching for the hem of her black top, he tore it off her, making her gasp. What are you doing? She shrieked, covering her with her arms. Not that it covered much, he thought. She was a decent-sized cup, not huge and not small either. The perfect size for his hands, he thought, frowning as he pushed the thought away. She was his stepsister, he reminded himself. His eyes moved from her tempting breasts to her waist before he crouched down. It'll heal, although it is pretty deep, he said, about to touch it when she grabbed his arms. Glaring at him despite the very faint blush on her cheeks. He raised an eyebrow, smirking at her embarrassment, not knowing it was their close proximity that was getting to her. Taking her wrists, he held them against the car, still crouching before her. What are you doing? She yelped, her heart hammering. Was she dreaming? It'll heal quicker, he said huskily. He leaned in, not missing her thudding heart, and ran his tongue along the wound slowly. She gasped as pleasure erupted through her. Her eyelids fluttered shut. As his tongue slowly ran up her hip, across her waist, and stopped just below her breast. He inhaled her tempting scent, the feel of her skin and the sweet taste of her blood. Alpha saliva had healing abilities, although more so in wolf form. He knew she would have healed soon enough, but seeing her there had awakened something inside him, and he had wanted to feel her smooth skin against his lips. He looked up, past her perfect mounds. Not missing the hardened buds, which sent blood rushing down south. Slowly shifting his gaze to her flushed face, just as their eyes met, the scent of her arousal hit him like an intoxicating avalanche. Cerulean blue eyes met sage green. Scarlet's heart thundered in her chest as Elijah stood up slowly, his gaze shifting to her red tempting lips. He'll eat his plush lips slowly, and she did not miss the piercing on his tongue, making her eyes widen slightly. He forced his gaze away, trying not to get lost in the scent of her arousal. What were they doing? He looked at the car, his back now to her. 2 tires were flat and there was no way they were going to be driving it home. Shift, we'll have to run, I'll link someone to collect the car and stuff. He said, trying not to look at her. Sure. Her reply came, sounding rather normal despite the crazy storm in her head. He smelled my arousal. No wonder he's not even looking at me, she thought, frustrated. She did not really want to shift, but there really was no other option. They both shifted and Elijah once again looked at her in surprise. It was not only her stunning grey-white fur that stood out, but she was big, over 4.5 feet tall. That was the size of an average alpha. She saw his curious gaze. How are you so big? He asked through the mind link. Luck, came her not so helpful reply as she broke into a run and ran towards home as fast as possible. He gave a wolfish grin, his wolf enjoying the thought of playing chase with a female. He ran after her, impressed with her speed. As he followed, keeping up with her, he had to quicken his own pace. It was not like chasing a normal wolf, that was something an alpha wolf could do with ease. He patted her humorously as he passed her, causing her to slow down for a split second and chuckle in her head. What happened, Red? He teased. Don't mess with me, Elijah. She retorted, lunging at his back, wincing as her side made impact with him. He grunted as he stumbled, tossing her wolf off him. She grabbed onto his neck with her jaw and both tumbled down the hill, laughing in their heads. Foul play there, sweetheart. His mocking voice came, making her heart pound. All's fair in love and war, and this is war. She replied through the link as he'll eat her face, making her growl. Are you two done? A male voice came, laughing heartily. Both wolves looked up to see they had reached pack borders and none other than the alpha stood there. The wolves sprang away from each other as if caught doing something wrong, something that only crossed both of their minds and no one else's. Jackson smiled down at his son. Welcome home, son. Glad to be back. Elijah replied as one of the wolves accompanying the alpha tossed them both some clothes. Both took them in their mouths and went to change behind some trees. Scarlet's heart was pounding. What had happened? Elijah had never been so playful. Pulling on the black baggy tee that fell to mid-thigh, she stepped out from behind the tree, her side still aching, although the bleeding had lessened. Being an alpha-blooded she-wolf, she healed faster than the normal wolf, and she was sure Elijah had helped. A blush faintly dusted her cheek, but she schooled her face into passiveness before she walked over to where Elijah was hugging his father. Although both men were over 6 foot, Elijah was clearly the bigger one. Ah, there you are? What happened to the car? Jackson asked, placing an arm around Scarlet's shoulder once he moved back from Elijah. We were ambushed, Elijah said, glancing at Scarlet, who had tensed. Rogues, Jackson said with a frown. Yes, Scarlet said quickly, making both alphas look at her. Elijah raised an eyebrow questioningly. What do you mean yes? Not now, please, I'll explain later, she pleaded through the link. It's strange that there are rogues out so close to the pack borders, Jackson said seriously. Just a stray lone wolf, don't stress it, I got Hank to get the car and stuff. Elijah said. Jackson nodded. That's my son, he said, then looked at Scarlet. Now how about we go home, your mother has definitely cooked a 5-course meal. You know her dad, she loves the kitchen. Scarlet said as Jackson kissed her forehead tenderly. Elijah watched the exchange with slight annoyance. He never understood why his father had to treat the girls as his own daughters. Although he knew he was being biased considering he treated Indigo like his little sister. Speaking of the pixie, Elijah! She shrieked, lunging onto Elijah's bare back and kissing his cheek. You're home. Yeah, and I'll probably be deaf if you continue to scream in my ear, he said as he cupped her behind her knees, carrying her piggyback style. Oh, it's okay, I'm sure you'll still be loved even if you do go deaf, Indigo replied as Scarlet looked back at them. Hey, why do you have blood dripping down your leg? All eyes went to Scarlet's legs, although Elijah's gaze had gone to her inner thighs first before realizing blood was dripping down from her waist. Oh, I hurt it a little, I'm fine, Scarlet said as Jackson looked very concerned. Oh no dear, this is not good, Elijah, couldn't you protect your sister? He said worriedly, scooping her up bridal style, making Elijah frown and Indigo roll her eyes. Daddy's girl, she muttered as Jackson hurriedly broke into a run. I'm fine, Dad, really? Scarlet protested, as they made their way down the winding path and through the trees. The slightly cloudy skies could be seen through the treetops. Attention seeker, Elijah retorted. The two really annoyed him, he hated their relationship. He stalked past them with Indigo on his back as she stuck her tongue out at Scarlet. Ignore them, Elijah, she's just a spoiled brat, she said, making Scarlet frown and Elijah nod in agreement before they both ran off towards home. Jackson shook his head as a sharp wind blew, messing up both their hair, making Scarlet blow a few strands of hers out of her face. Ignore them too, he said, knowing they always picked on her. Although I thought you and Elijah may have been putting your differences aside, but seems not. That won't ever happen, Scarlet huffed as they walked through the green fields approaching the woods that surrounded the small pack village area. Jackson chuckled as he agreed reluctantly. Siblings. What can I say? You're both headstrong. Scarlet didn't reply, feeling a sense of guilt filling her. She didn't think of her stepbrother in a brotherly way at all. It was later in the evening, and after getting her checked by the pack doctor, Jackson had brought her home. She had showered, donning a pair of black leggings and a V-neck purple tee. The smell of freshly cooked chicken, roasted potatoes, southern fried chicken strips, stuffed peppers, and lasagna wafted into her room. She loved her mother's cooking. It always felt nice when the weather changed for the worse. It was pouring down outside, unlike the clear sky earlier. The joys of British weather, she thought morbidly. She did like the rain as long as she was inside, but going out in it wasn't the most enjoyable thing. She heard the creak of the wooden floorboards outside her room and knew someone was going down the hall, the downside of a traditional style house. It was a large house, the largest in the territory, with 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, an office, 2 lounges, game room, a gym room in the basement, kitchen, and a dining room. It was a nice old English-style brick building with dark-framed windows. "Oi Scar! Come make your mighty presence known at Simba's coronation!" Indigo shouted. Scarlet closed her eyes and sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Shut up, Indy!" she snapped back, hating the nicknames her sister had for her. "You know, if you got hurt on your face today you would have looked even more like Scar." Indy's voice came giggling as she ran off down the hall. Scarlet exited her room after donning a pair of black block heels. She didn't like walking barefoot in the house. Indy simply said it was because she was a midget. Maybe it was true, she felt a little short for werewolf standards. She walked down the steps, her fingers brushing the dark wooden balcony rail, stopping in her tracks when she saw the front door open. A strong draft of cold air entering the warm house, accompanied by the smell of earth and the sweet scent of Fiona Williamson. The girl was stood leaning against the door frame, wearing a white leather skirt, a pale pink peplum blouse and a white leather jacket. Her long tan legs on show, she was a stunning 21-year-old. Scarlet had to admit it with her 5'8" height, long brown waves, and those big hazel eyes. Elijah was looking down at her with a smirk on his face, clearly flirting. Scarlet felt a pang of jealousy go through her as she frowned slightly, averting her gaze and stalked towards the kitchen. "Oh hey Scarlet!" Fiona said, smiling sweetly, stopping Scarlet in her tracks. Elijah turned his gaze, falling to her perfect peach, thinking, did she have to wear such skimpy clothing? The leggings stuck to her. He was not used to seeing her look this good. Scarlet took a deep breath before plastering a smile on her face and turned. "Oh hey Fiona, I didn't see you there," she said, making Elijah raise an eyebrow. "Really? She's hard to misread, looking this gorgeous anyway," he added, making Fiona blush and pat his chest playfully. Scarlet rolled her eyes. "I know, she really is, but it's your big fat ass that blocked my entire view," she retorted, making Fiona smile. "This is far from fat, wouldn't you agree, Fiona?" he said, playing with a strand of her long brown hair. "Definitely anything but fat," she said, blushing. "Aw, how cute! Well, as much as I would love to stay and chat, I really don't want to discuss Elijah. Plus I'm really hungry," Scarlet said, crossing her arms, only making Elijah's eyes fall to her for a split second. Fiona laughed. "Then I won't keep you. Nice seeing you, Scarlet." Scarlet replied. "Yeah, you should go eat, that is definitely not all muscle," he snickered, making Scarlet turn and glare at him before she stormed off into the kitchen that was glowing welcomingly. "Be nice to her, Elijah," Fiona said in a flirtier tone. "So, I'll see you tonight?" "Sure. See you tonight, leave your window open," he whispered into her ear, kissing her jaw before stepping away. Fiona nodded before she walked off. Elijah glanced at her, thinking she had fine, but there was something about Scarlet that made him hard just thinking about it. He glanced down at the front of him, thinking he really needed to meet Fiona tonight. Dinner had just finished, with Indigo and Elijah teasing Scarlet at every opportunity they got. With Jessica smiling and chuckling along with them and leaving Jackson to defend his daughter. "You're on washing up duty," Jessica said to Scarlet, running her fingers through her shoulder-length black hair. Scarlet didn't look like her at all, whilst Indigo was almost a carbon copy, both having the same lean build. Jessica at 5,9 and Indigo already taller than her sister at 5,6. Both had jet black hair and deep navy blue eyes. "She hurt herself, babe," Jackson said, looking at his wife, his eyes trailing over her curves. Jessica raised an eyebrow, a smile playing on her lips, not missing her husband's gaze on her. "She's healed," she said, and Scarlet pouted. "At least you could show some sympathy," she said, standing up and began collecting the dishes. Elijah sat back watching her. "Need help, Red?" he asked. He did not mind spending more time with her. It meant he got to enjoy the view, something that was indeed a bad idea. He actually wanted to ask her about earlier. Why had she lied about the attack being a rogue? "Ah, how sweet, we both know you won't be helping," she said, making him smirk. "Depends on what you mean by helping. There's a lot I could help you with," he replied with a smirk. Scarlet's heart skipped a beat, as Indigo glanced up from her phone. "Well, I'm afraid I'm off. Daniel's outside and might spend the night," she said. Jessica nodded. Daniel was Indigo's best friend and gay. She never minded having him over, knowing he had no interest in Indigo in that way. "Have fun," Jackson said, smiling at her as he finished off his tea. "Is he finally out of the closet then?" Elijah asked, raising an eyebrow. He had known about Daniel for ages through Indigo, as she was pretty close to Elijah. The boy hadn't been comfortable telling anyone. Well, seems like things had changed. "Yes, and life's never been better for him," Indigo said proudly. Scarlet looked between Elijah and Indigo, feeling a little jealous of how they shared more with each other than either did with her. She slammed the dishes into the sink, making her mother growl. "If any of my dishes break, by the goddess I swear I will wring that neck of yours." Scarlet winced as Indigo scurried from the room. Jessica was scary when angry. Elijah just smirked. "Sorry, Mom," Scarlet said as Jackson stroked his wife's hair. "Come on, babe, let's leave her to it. You have had a long day. I know a few ways to make you a little more relaxed," he said, standing up and picking her up, throwing her over his shoulder as he delivered a sharp slap to her, making Jessica giggle and blush. "Gross. Get a room." Scarlet cringed as she pushed her sleeves up and put on some gloves. "That's the plan, dear," Jackson said with a chuckle, his blue eyes sparkling with amusement. "Elijah, help your sister." "Whatever," Elijah said as the couple left the kitchen, making Scarlet groan when she heard another giggle from her mom. "It's annoying how Dad makes Mom go from vicious she-wolf to giggling high schooler," she said as she began washing up. Elijah got up from the small oak table that stood to the side of the kitchen. He walked over to her, his eyes falling to her once again. When had he gotten so perverted? "Oh yeah? So, what makes you go from feisty to..." He was cut off when she elbowed him sharply in the waist, making him wince. She was stronger than he thought, and he was impressed she had realized he had been that close. He had approached with stealth. She turned and glared at him. "First of all, don't call me a biche. Secondly, stay away or next time I'll be hitting you where the sun doesn't shine," she said, turning back to the sink. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Ignoring her warning, he wrapped his arm around her waist, squashing her between the worktop and his hard muscular body and making her gasp as she pressed against his very noticeable manhood. Her heart hammered. "What are you doing, Elijah?" she asked, her voice coming out a little shaky. He smirked, inhaling her intoxicating scent, his nose brushing her hair. "Trying to see what makes you into a weak-kneed high schooler," he whispered huskily. He could hear her heartbeat, his fingers brushing her taut stomach, seeing her rise and fall. "Elijah," she said, trying to focus, what was he doing? He had never teased her like this in the past. Yes, he'd tug at her hair, pick her up and throw her into a pool, but this… "Scarlet," he said in the same tone as her. Her name sounded different from his lips, having always called her Red. She froze when she felt him throb against her. She shoved him away, her cheeks flushed lightly. She turned and stared at him. He looked into her eyes, trying not to let his emotion show on his face and swallowing hard. With the pleasure that was running through him, the need for her was simply growing. What was happening to him? Why couldn't he keep his eyes and hands off her? "Stop messing around," she said, thinking it was inappropriate. Even if he loved teasing her, it scared her that she'd let her own twisted secret out, and then what would he think? When he found out she had very dirty thoughts about him, her stepbrother. "It's really a pleasure getting a reaction out of you," he said, tapping her nose. Grabbing the dishcloth, he leaned against the counter waiting for her to begin washing. "You're actually going to dry?" she asked, avoiding his gorgeous blue eyes as she stepped up the sink once again and began washing, feeling his eyes on her. "Dad did say to help," he replied. Her hair curtained her face and he did not mind, it meant he could observe her figure perfectly. "So why did you lie about the attack?" She tensed, thinking obviously he would not let it go. This was his pack, and its safety was priority. "They were part of our previous pack, a pack that's miles away from here. They shouldn't have been here. I don't even know how they found us," she said, quietly rinsing a cup and placing it down. He picked it up and began drying it, a frown now etching onto his handsome face. "Why did they want you?" he asked, frowning. He knew minimum about their old pack. His father had simply said their father was abusive and they needed protection. "I don't know if you know or not, but my biological dad, he was an alpha, abusive, ruthless, and cruel. He hated the fact Mom didn't give him a male heir," she said, their moment from earlier forgotten as both pondered in the seriousness of the matter. "That's almost unheard of. Alphas never have female heirs. If not the first child, a second would be a male, and have the alpha power. No wonder you were huge," he said, realization hitting him. "You're an alpha, a alpha female." He stared at the 5'2" bombshell in front of him, thinking how was that even possible? Shouldn't she be bulging with muscle? Yes, she was toned but not excessively. Maybe the rules were different for a female alpha. Was that even a thing? What? Too shocked that even a female can be an alpha? She asked, glaring at him in annoyance, flicking some soap suds at his handsome face. "If you weren't wearing such tight pants, I would have wondered if you were maybe packing some balls down there," he said, smirking and whipping her with the dishcloth, making her yelp. He snickered, earning himself another glare. "But why hide it? If he's trying to find you, then we need to be ready," he said. "I know, and I get that. I was thinking, if I visited and asked what he wanted?" I don't want Mom to go through that. She's happy now, and even though they burned out their mate bond it still exists. I don't want her to be put through that, not because of me. I'm strong and I can handle myself. I won't wait up feisty pants. Are you planning to just go see Daddy dearest all alone? What is wrong with you? He said, frowning at her. She almost whimpered at the amount of alpha aura rolling off him in waves. She may be an alpha wolf, but he was far stronger than she was. He sighed, seeing her trying not to flinch. Dad knows that your dad was an alpha? He asked, running his fingers through his hair, trying to pull back his anger and aura. She nodded as she finished washing the dishes. Taking the gloves off, she washed her hands, gazing out the window at the garden that was lit up cozily with fairy lights and small colorful lanterns courtesy of Indigo. Then I'll come with you. I'll come up with some excuse. He said. She looked at him, her eyes widening slightly. He wanted to help her? Wow, you really have changed, Elijah. You actually want to help. She said, raising a brow. He tossed the drying cloth down, having finished wiping, and crossed his arms. Why wouldn't I help? This is my pack, and no matter how annoying you is, you're part of it. He said. Her stomach fluttered at his words, yet they also left her feeling a bit disappointed. The only reason he was helping was because she was a part of his pack. She said. Their eyes met and the urge to close the distance crossed his mind. He looked away, frowning. Well, I'm off. I have a date. He said, taking his phone out. She felt a pang of hurt shoot through her and nodded. Sure, she said. Thinking of Fiona and Elijah made her stomach plummet. What was worse was the feelings she had hoped were gone were still there, if not even more than what they had been 2 years ago. Lock the door on your way out. She left the kitchen, not waiting for a reply, slamming the door behind her. Elijah raised an eyebrow and gave a small nod to the empty door. Pocketing his phone, he left the house, heading towards the pack house where he knew Fiona would be waiting for him. Oh, Elijah, that's it. Seeing the shocking image in his head made him realize exactly what he thought of Scarlet. Babe, is everything okay? Fiona asked gently, placing her slim hand on his muscular bicep. Elijah tensed. Don't. He said, his voice dangerously cold and making Fiona freeze with it. Sorry, she said. A tense silence fell between them. They had been on-off buddies for a few years before he had left for his alpha training. Whenever he had visited, they would get it on. Many had thought and hoped they would turn out to be mates, which hadn't been the case. It was something that had internally devastated Fiona, who still secretly hoped that Elijah would fall in love with her and accept her. It was common knowledge he didn't really believe in the mate bond or its value. He had always warned her on calling him by any pet names and made it clear they were nothing more than occasional partners, one of many. The fact they weren't mates had never bothered Elijah, as he didn't really see her as more than just a good friend. Something that was now clearly not working. Are you okay? Did something happen? Did I do something wrong? She asked softly as he got up, picking up his boxers and pants, then slipping them on. She could still see his thick large member bulging. It seems you just don't do it for me anymore. He said quietly. His words were harsh and he knew it. She flinched at those words, feeling the stabbing pain of rejection. I'm sorry, maybe we can try something else, she said, getting on her knees at the edge of the bed, feeling rather vulnerable. He looked at her, he had to admit that out of all the women he'd slept with she was the least annoying. She could have even been an ideal Luna, she was genuine, sweet, and cared for others. But he never really saw her as more. If we have to try to make something work, it means it's useless. It's nothing personal, Fiona, but I think we're definitely done. He said, not bothering to put his shirt on as he held it in his hand and walked to the window, glancing back at the she-wolf who had tears in her eyes. But it didn't bother him. Jumping out, he dropped the 2 stories to the ground, landing with ease before he straightened up and headed home. His mind a very uncomfortable hard-on to accompany it. Entering the mansion, he went up the stairs 2 at a time. Going into his bedroom, he tossed his shirt to the floor before walking to the adjoining bathroom, a bathroom that was shared with Scarlet. So lost in his thoughts, he didn't realize when the bathroom door from Scarlet's room opened. It had been a while since Elijah had left. Scarlet had showered, browsed Instagram, posting an image or 2 and even put some music on and tried to read a book. However, Scarlet hadn't been able to focus, feeling annoyed for no obvious reason. Well, there was a reason she was not about to acknowledge. She kept on thinking about everything that had happened, her mind kept on replaying their small moments from earlier. What did they even mean? She finished off the chocolate she had been munching. Oh, how she loved chocolate! Groaning, she sat up, deciding to brush her teeth and get to bed. She walked to the door thinking that was another annoying thing, sharing a bathroom with him. That it would now constantly smell of him would only add to her thoughts. She was so lost in her thoughts she didn't even notice the sound of the shower. Opening the door, she stepped inside, hit with a blanket of steam. She frowned in confusion before her eyes widened in shock, realization hitting her as her eyes fell on the godlike man in the shower, masturbating. Her cheeks flushed, a small gasp escaping her. She was not able to stop her eyes from trailing over him. He was complete muscle, delicious, perfect muscle. God, never had she imagined it to be so perfect. A groan brought her back to reality. Elijah looked up at the sound of the door slamming, thinking, did she just see him? Shame he hadn't realized. It would have been even better having the real thing before him as he came. He smirked as he grabbed her body wash. Well, at least he had something to tease her over tomorrow. Scarlet placed a hand to her chest. Her heart was pounding erratically, the image clear in her mind. Oh goddess! She groaned. She stood up, locking the door. Her stomach was still knotted. Turning off her lamp and music, she threw herself onto the bed. Wasn't he supposed to be with Fiona? What happened that his plans changed and he had to take care of himself? She blushed, the image clear in her mind as she ran her palm down her face, staring at the ceiling. The crack through the curtains let moonlight seep into her bedroom, casting a sliver of light across her room. She bit her lip, and closing her eyes. She blinked her eyes to clear her mind. Elijah! I hate you for doing this to me, she muttered. She buried her flushed face into her cushion. The sun was barely up and Elijah was on his way to the training grounds. Even if he had just got back yesterday, it didn't mean he was going to slack off from his duties. Grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge, he saw Indigo standing there, in tracksuit bottoms and a tank top, yawning away. Good to see you're not slacking, he said, tossing her the water bottle and taking another. You know Mom and Dad won't let me slack. she said, catching it before she stretched. Elijah looked at her amused. Although she was awake, she was clearly not fully there. "And where's Red?" he asked, last night flashing in his mind. His question seemed to wake her up as she shuffled on her feet, avoiding his gaze. "She doesn't really train with us. Dad's given her permission to train solo," she mumbled. Elijah frowned. "We're a pack, we train together." Who does she think he made to walk past Indigo, thinking how he did not expect that from Scarlet? She always loved to train and was one of the best warriors in the pack. Well, she was when he last saw her 2 years ago. Indigo grabbed his arm. "Don't, Elijah. For once I think Scarlet did the right thing," she said, looking up at him. He saw the pain in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice almost a growl. The girl flinched and Elijah took a deep breath, trying to calm down. It's not my place to say, but when the others saw her wolf form, she faced a lot of bullying, especially from our age range. And then one day things got out of hand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elijah listened, anger rising within him. "What did they do?" he asked, his alpha aura pressing down on her like a blanket. Indigo stepped back, fear filling her. Although she knew he would never hurt her, her wolf side still knew an alpha, and fear settled in. "It isn't my place to say. I wasn't even there, but I heard. If you want to know, you're going to have to ask Scarlet. Even Mom and Dad don't know," she said. Elijah nodded curtly. "Fine, I'll do that. You head out, I'm not joining today." "Is Scarlet upstairs or out?" he asked. "She's gone," Indigo replied, hoping that she did not get in trouble with Scarlet. "Please don't mention me." "I won't," Elijah said as he headed to the door. He needed to find her. After a good 15 minutes of trying to sniff out her scent, he finally found her just outside pack borders near the river. She was using the nearest tree as a punching bag, splinters of wood breaking away with every punch. The stain of blood on the tree showed him she had not gone easy. "Is it wise to be training outside pack borders?" he said, making her pause. She turned and wiped her forehead, dressed in black yoga pants that she was squeezed into, showing off a lot of cleavage. He thought. What were those made out of? So many women seemed to disappear, and here she was showing off her delicious twins with a cleavage any girl would kill for. She spoke, bringing his head back to the present. "Aren't you supposed to be in the pack training grounds?" she said just as last night's event returned. She blushed, glad her face was already flushed. Elijah did not miss the sudden tinge that darkened her face. "I wanted to know why the strongest she-wolf in the pack was missing," he asked, crossing his arms. As much as he wanted to tease her, he did not trust himself. Last night had been a clear eye-opener to exactly what he thought of her, and out here, secluded, her dripping with sweat, was not going to help him in this matter. "I prefer to train alone," she said, turning her back onto him. As she bent down picking a fresh bandage to wrap over her hands, his gaze fell. He thought, looking away. "Alpha's orders read, we're a pack, we train together," he said. She frowned. "You're not Alpha yet, Dad gave me permission," she said quietly. He closed the gap between them, grabbing her by the elbow and spinning her around. He pushed her against the tree as he stared into her eyes, his cerulean blue eyes now darkening to a cobalt blue. She knew his wolf was surfacing, meaning she had angered him. I am still an alpha, and when I give an order you obey it. He growled. Her intoxicating scent filled his senses and the urge to bury his nose in her neck almost overtook him. I have my reasons, Elijah, now let go. She snapped, not scared. I hate how you males are so egotistical and think we should obey everything you say. Her own eyes flashed silver, both wolves stared the other down. It shocked Elijah that she could still hold her own against him. Even when he'd gone for his training he had come across many alphas, and he had been one of the strongest. Seeing a she-wolf hold her ground was intriguing, and more so for so long. Even an alpha's mate did not hold this much power over an alpha. I want to know your reasons, he said, lowering his face so he was staring into her eyes. Taking her wrists he pinned them against the tree next to her head. Both were breathing heavily, their chests now pressed against each other. She pressed her thigh together, needing him to move before she got turned on. The heat of the others' bodies only making both their heartbeats quicken. Fine. Let go of me and I'll tell you, she said, struggling in his hold. Elijah blinked and stepped back. He had gotten distracted by her, again. I'm waiting, he said, crossing his muscular arms. On one condition, you will do and say nothing, she said. He turned, glaring at her. Don't push me, Red, he warned. Do you want to know or not? Fine, he snapped, slamming his hand into the tree and splintering a good part of it. After I turned, and some of the guys saw that my wolf form was bigger than theirs, they began to tease me. It was fine, I can take a load of bullying, she said, walking over to a spot clear of chipped wood splinters and sat on her feet playing with some grass. They got a little out of hand, starting to throw physical jabs that maybe I was born a male and hence why my wolf's huge. Even that only annoyed me for the fact they were. Our pack is diverse and every member is equal, that's always been the rule. I did tell Dad about that, considering it could be hurtful to others, and things did get better, for a bit. Until there was a party. Some had drunk way more than they should have, some of us decided to go for a run. I refused at first until they said I was too scared I'd lose, so I went. Elijah listened. He didn't like where this was going, not at all. We shifted and ran off into the woods, away from the party. We split into two groups. I didn't realize I was the only woman with the 6 biggest shocks. They had planned it from the start. They pinned my wolf down, said they wanted to see what I was in wolf form. Was I a female or male? Scarlet stopped, hating the feeling of helplessness that was overcoming her. Hating how weak and scared she felt that night. Elijah's jaw was clenched in anger, rage coursing through him. He felt disgusted at the fact he had such vile pack mates. The very thought of her being treated like that awakened something tenfold more dangerous within him. They looked, laughed, and through the mind link they joked they should test if I really felt like a woman should. I was able to fight them off. I wish I had sooner, but it was 6 against 1. There you have it, so I'd rather avoid them. She finished, standing up like she hadn't just told him such a shocking piece of information. Trying not to let sadness wash over her, she did not cry, and she would never give anyone that satisfaction to see her cry. Names. Elijah's rugged growl came. Her eyes widened, realizing he was emanating anger as an oven did heat. You agreed to no names. That is not something I can let pass. He shouted, and Scarlett's heart skipped a beat seeing him getting so worked up over her. She walked over to him, bravely cupping his face. Elijah, calm down, this happened 2 months ago. I'm okay and I'm fine training alone, don't stress over it. She said, feeling the stubble on his jaw graze her fingertips. God, he was so handsome. He looked down at her, his dark cobalt blue eyes flickering to cerulean. He placed his hands on her hips, not missing how good she felt in his hands. She was the right amount of thickness and meat. His chest heaved as he glared down at her. Her soft pink lips void of their usual red looking so appetizing. Name's Red. Now. Or by the moon goddess I'll kiss you. He growled, looking into her large soft green eyes that seemed to calm him down despite how angry he felt. Shock was clear in her now even larger eyes. She pouted. Then you're going to have to kiss me, because I'm not telling. She replied stubbornly. Glaring at him, she removed her hands from his face and tried to push him away. He did not budge, his eyes darkening as he leaned in closer. You asked for it, Red. He said huskily, and before she could even comprehend what was happening, his lips crashed against hers. Her heart thundering in her chest, she summoned all her strength and pushed him away. What are you doing? She shouted, shock and embarrassment coursed through her. I gave you an option, sweetheart. He said, trying to contain his emotions. Her cheeks were flushed despite the glare she was giving him. I didn't think you would go through with it. We're siblings. She hissed. Step-siblings. We're not related. He said sharply. Their eyes met and Elijah stepped towards her. Scarlet stood her ground. She didn't really have anywhere to go. Behind her back was a tree. Still, we've grown up as siblings for the last 8 years, this is wrong. She said. All she could think about was the kiss, but it was so wrong. What was even going through his mind? Red, calm down, it was just a kiss. Elijah said. He knew she was a little reckless and her temper was wild. Brothers don't kiss sisters. She snapped. Chill, why are you so angry? Is it 'cause you liked it? He asked, crossing his arms. She froze, her face paling. He watched her. He was sure she had. If she said yes, then what? No, she was right, this was wrong. No, I didn't. I'm a woman who has hormones, it's just been a while since I've got with someone. She said. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Well, there's my welcoming home bash tonight, find yourself a man. He said, sounding more annoyed than he meant to. Oh, I will, you should go get Fiona to take care of that. She spat back, motioning to the front of his pants. Oh wait, I forgot she doesn't seem to do it for you anymore, right? He glared at her. Don't push me, Red. Don't go kissing me then. She shot back. Elijah raised his hand, punching the tree right next to her head. Scarlet didn't even flinch, her green eyes glaring defiantly at him. You Red? He said, feeling even more confused. No thanks. She said icily, flipping him the finger before grabbing her bottle and gloves from the floor and storming off. What did I just do? He hissed, slamming his hand into the tree and watching it split before turning and leaving the area. Scarlet had returned home. What had happened? Why had he kissed her? Was there a chance he found her attractive? The questions were swirling in her head and she had no proper answer. Whatever happened should not have, no matter how good it had felt. She was glad she had pushed him away before she got turned on and he smelled it. Entering her bedroom, she slammed the door behind her and glared at the room. It had 3 plain grey walls and 1 feature wall of grey and silver geometric diamond wallpaper. Black curtains and bedding with the floor covered in plush grey carpet. There were pops of red around the room, in the form of some ornaments, some cushions and her beanbag near her bookshelf. She entered the bathroom, looking at the door that led to his room. She took a shower and decided to avoid him for the rest of the day. In fact, she would not go to his stupid welcome home party. Oh wait, it was taking place here in the mansion gardens. Groaning, she washed her hair in frustration. Then all she could do was avoid him at all costs. Evening fell soon enough. Jessica had spent the day baking a welcoming home cake for Elijah and Indigo had been all hyper helping the other pack members with the party decor. Elijah had thankfully spent the afternoon with his friends. They consisted of Aaron Nicholson, the future beta of the pack, Liam White, the head warrior who had recently taken over the position, being one of the strongest wolves in the pack. Then there was Hank Williamson, Fiona's brother and future Delta third in command of the pack. Scarlet was now getting dressed, knowing any minute now her best friend Angela Jacobs would come running in. As if on cue, the door banged open and there she was, with her waist-length black locks and chocolate brown eyes, dressed in a green skater dress and stroppy gold heels. "So how do I look? Think I can get Elijah?" she asked, making Scarlet tense. "Well, he seems to kiss anything, so yet I'm sure you can," she said, going back to apply her red lipstick. "Are you saying I'm not good enough?" Angela complained, stomping over to the bed and dropping herself onto it as if her life was over. "No, I'm just saying, he's a boy, and you're hot, he won't be able to resist," Scarlet said curtly, wondering why he actually had never been with Angela. He had slept with more than half the females around. "Ouch. I see you two are still not on the best of terms," Angela said. Scarlet shrugged. "He's an star. She said, standing up. Dressed in leather pants that emphasized her curves and a black lace, high neck, full sleeve top that was tucked into her pants, on her feet she wore 5-inch black heels, finishing off with some dangly earrings. She did a small twirl for Angela. "So out of 10?" she asked. Angela raised an eyebrow. 8, you look like you're about to go castrate someone with those vicious nails and too much black for my liking. Are you sure you're not a vampire?" "I'm sure vampires don't exist," Scarlet replied, satisfied. An 8 from Angela meant she looked good. "Now come on, this too needs to wow a certain alpha," she said, motioning to herself. Both girls left the room and Scarlet locked the door behind her, not wanting anyone to come into her room. They entered the garden where music was blaring loudly. A dance floor had been set up to one side and lights scattered the garden. A buffet was set up to the left and a bar on the other. Some tables were set out, where some of the elder wolves were sat chatting. Scarlet smiled seeing Jackson's Aunt Amelia sitting talking to her friends and went over. She always liked the woman, she was honest, straightforward, and the best part, she always told Elijah off. "Grandma Amy," Scarlet said, surprising the woman as she hugged her from behind. Amelia smiled slightly but then gave her a frown, patting her arm. "What have I told you about trying to break my back with those knockers of yours?" she said with a huff. Scarlet looked at her amused. "Oh come on Grandma, they aren't that heavy," she said as she crouched down next to the woman and looked up at her. "So how come you haven't visited in the last few weeks? Has that father of yours asked me to come?" she growled. Scarlet sighed. Amelia never saw eye to eye with her sister's son and she had no idea what the full story behind that was. She was also one of the rare elder wolves who did approve of Jessica, and Scarlet was sure it was one of the reasons the pack at least tolerated her mother. "I'm sure Dad's been busy, but now that Elijah's back he'll have more time. How about this? This coming Friday, I'm inviting you around, and I'll officially cook for you too. You know I'm an amazing cook," Scarlet said. She felt sorry for the woman. Her husband and son were killed in a fight with another pack years ago and she had no family other than Jackson. Amelia hid a smile and simply waved her hand as the other women at the table watched with smiles on their faces. "Well fine, since you're insisting. Don't let it go to your head, I haven't had food you've cooked in ages, God knows if it's still edible," she said. "Perfect," Scarlet said, standing up. "Shame you're not still squatting, think half the male population were staring at that." Elijah's voice came in her head. Turning as he approached, she frowned at him. The same expression was mirrored on Amelia's face. "Here he is, the good-for-nothing son," she grumbled. "What's got your granny knickers in a twist?" he asked her, making Scarlet resist a smile as the three elderly she-wolves gasped. "Shameless rat!" Amelia huffed. "I always knew Jackson would never have a decent child." Elijah simply smirked as he brushed past Scarlet, trying not to notice how she looked. A lot of the single she-wolves had decked up and wore the tiniest dresses they could without it being deemed a top. But here she was stealing his attention. It irked him. "I'm sure Red here annoyed you, didn't she?" Elijah asked, although he had heard the conversation. "Of course not, she's nothing like you or your old man," Amelia wittered on. Elijah and Scarlet's eyes met, Scarlet looking rather smug. Just then Angela came over. "Alpha Elijah! Welcome home!" she said, batting her lashes at him. Scarlet and Amelia rolled their eyes and Elijah almost chuckled. The two were more alike than either would admit, perhaps that's why they got on like a house on fire. "Angela," Elijah said with a small nod. Angela bit her lip whilst twirling a strand of her hair and Scarlet inwardly sighed. Why did all girls become airheads around him? She looked at Elijah. She had to admit he looked good in a black button-down shirt with a few buttons open and sleeves rolled up. A necklace hung around his neck paired with grey jeans and black Timberlands. The kiss from earlier came to mind and she looked away quickly, her heart hammering. "Wanna dance?" Angela asked bravely. She had practiced this moment for hours and was not going to lose the chance to ask. "I don't really want. If he's dancing with someone, it's going to be someone prettier, like me." An annoying nasally voice came. Scarlet knew exactly who it was before she even turned, Kira Jefferet, the pack slut to be precise. Dressed in the tiniest hot pink dress one could find, and her makeup was garish, clashing with her fake tan. Scarlet was sure she would be having nightmares tonight. Even Elijah was staring. He had seen her 2 years ago, but the transformation was ghastly. How had he ever slept with that thing? He thought. Alpha. She cooed. Elijah seemed lost for words. Scarlet smirked, seeing him lost for words. Unlike Angela and Kira, both of whom thought he was impressed, Scarlet knew the truth. Alpha. Scarlet said sweetly. You should dance with Chucky's sister, I mean Kira. No, Elijah said, his gorgeous eyes still a little wide. He smirked at Scarlet, who was enjoying the scene. Slinging an arm around her shoulders, he smiled at the girls. Forgive me ladies, but I think I'm going to dance with my sister. We have a lot to catch up on, wouldn't you agree, Red? Scarlet's heart was hammering, her eyes wide. His closeness and his statement had knocked her confidence, leaving her mute. Elijah simply smirked. Taking her wrist, he pulled her towards the dance floor, leaving the other two she-wolves speechless. Elijah. Scarlet said as he stopped on the dance floor. Lonely by Diplo began playing and he gave her a smirk. Come on Red, let's see those moves that had every girl in high school envious. He said as he began singing along. Her heart skipped a beat as he began moving to the music, her stomach fluttered crazily. Was this a dream she would wake up from? Living in the moment, she began dancing, raising her hands she swayed her body to the music. Elijah took her hand, spinning her around, before pulling her close as he danced behind her. To everyone watching it looked like two young adults having innocent fun. But the emotions that ran through them both were so different, with Elijah's eyes trying not to linger on her killer curves and Scarlet realizing she was just falling a little more for him. He nudged her with his hip, making her stumble. She smiled despite herself and nudged him back. Their eyes met and a soft smile crossed his face. Scarlet's eyes widened in shock. It was rare to see a genuine smile on that handsome face of his. If he didn't grab her hips dancing with her, she would have stopped. Her heart thundering as she danced in a daze. The Elijah before her was one she did not recognize. He was so different than 2 years ago. Jessica smiled, leaning lovingly on Jackson's shoulder. Look at them, they're finally getting on, she said happily. Jackson nodded happily, watching the siblings dance. I'm glad, I guess Elijah has matured more than I thought. He chuckled, caressing his wife's hair and kissing her forehead gently. Although there was no mate bond between them, he loved her dearly. The feeling that he could not be apart from her long, or his wolf feeling restless, never occurred as it did with his mate, but the love was strong. They had been two broken souls who had found each other. He is going to make an amazing alpha, Jessica replied, watching Elijah spin Scarlet, who smiled. Let's just hope he finds his mate soon. An alpha needs his Luna, Jackson said seriously. Jessica nodded in agreement before leaving her husband as someone called for her. Back on the dance floor, the couple were interrupted by someone. Move over Alpha, at least spare us the one girl who you can't have. Hank, the future Delta said with a smirk, bringing the two out of their trance. And who said I'm going to want to dance with you? Scarlet said, looking at him. Stepping away from Elijah, Hank raised an eyebrow. He was handsome with his black hair and those hazel eyes, but unlike Fiona, who was a sweet girl, Hank was a jerk. After Elijah, he was probably the next biggest player in the pack. Although she would never tell Elijah, he had been one of the guys that night, although he acted like it never happened. Scarlet wondered if he had just been completely wasted. But still, she couldn't forgive him. Elijah did not miss the hostility from Scarlet as she glared at the taller man, wondering if there was more to it. Hank flashed her a smile. "Oh, come on, Scarlet, one dance," he said. "I said no," Scarlet said, walking off, leaving the two men on the dance floor. Angela rushed over, a pout on her face. "That was not fair," she grumbled, dragging Scarlet towards the bar. Being 18 meant she was legally at a drinking age in the UK, but for werewolves who had a very high tolerance, they had been drinking for a few years, although it had been more limited then. Angela was a year older than Scarlet. She took a seat sulking. "He isn't an amazing dancer, don't worry," Scarlet said, feeling a little bad for her. "But do you know how many hours I practiced to ask him that?" she said. "Practiced what?" Indigo's voice came, strolling over with Daniel. "Hey Scar!" "Hey Angel!" Daniel said, giving them both a smile. "Hey Daniel, looking good," Scarlet said. "You too. Loving the pants," he said. "You look an 11 tonight." Scarlet turned to Angela, who had just been lamenting to Indigo on how Elijah refused to dance with her. "He said I'm an 11. She said smugly. "Oh whatever, you're a 7. Angela said, making an Indigo smirk. "I thought you said 8 earlier," Scarlet said, raising an eyebrow. "You became a 7 after dancing with the Alpha," Angela grumbled, making the rest laugh. "So how did that even happen?" "Like what? Are you two actually getting along?" Indigo asked, grabbing a drink as she quickly looked around. She was only 14 and not at an age either of their parents approved of her drinking. "Brave girl," Daniel said, daring not to take one in front of his parents. "He was trying to get away from Kira," Scarlet said casually as Indigo waited for an answer. "Oh yes. What did he think of her new look?" she asked, giggling as Daniel snickered. "He looked traumatized," Scarlet said with a smirk. They all broke into laughter. Elijah glanced their way, as he watched the group laugh. Scarlet sitting there, legs crossed, one hand holding her drink and the other playing with her hair. He looked away only when Aaron, his best friend, called him. Aaron was the same age as him and he had found his mate when he was 19, she had been from their own pack, and since then he was happily in love and mated. It was much later and all the elderly, parents with young children and most of the mated wolves had retreated for the night. It did not take a genius to know why. Some unmated wolves had left together too. Those in their early teens had gone and Scarlet had spent most of the evening drinking or eating, although that got her some snarky comments from Kira and her stupid gang. Not that it bothered Scarlet at all, she never gave 2F* for what anyone thought of her. She looked around, the crowd had dispersed a lot. Elijah was still sitting there talking to Aaron and his mate Monica, a gorgeous woman with deep melanin skin and braided locks. She had a body that many girls were envious of. She saw Fiona was sat alone and felt a little bad for her, wondering what had happened between her and Elijah. Although they had never been officially together, she was his most common partner. Kira was stood with her group laughing and acting overly fake, trying to grab Elijah's attention. Angela had drunk too much and her parents had taken her home. "So why are you all alone over here?" Hank asked from behind. Scarlet tensed for a moment as he took the seat next to her. "Because I want to be, can you not get that I want to be alone?" she snapped back. Hank smirked, masking how he really felt. He hated her high and mighty attitude, the way she acted like she was better than everyone. All he wanted was to use her, show that she was nothing but someone that could be replaced. Although he hated her attitude, he had to admit, she was one gorgeous she-wolf. "Come on Scarlet, play nice or I'm sure we both know I can bite too," he said winking at her. She turned away from him not wanting to talk to him any further. He placed his hand on her thigh and Scarlet jerked it away before stepping away from him and letting her stool hitting the ground, capturing the attention of everyone around. "Don't touch me!" she hissed. "Don't cause so much drama, why do you play so hard to get? What are you so afraid of? Have you got something to hide?" he asked through the mind link. Scarlet froze. Did he remember that night? Why else did he speak through the mind link? Anger bubbled to the surface and she shoved him hard. A powerful aura surrounded her as her eyes flashing silver. "You Hank!" she hissed. Elijah got up in a flash as he saw Hank growl. He had no idea what had happened between the two but things were getting out of hand fast. "Show some respect, Scarlet!" Hank hissed, placing his hands on her shoulders. She shoved him off. "Don't touch me!" she shouted, lunging at him. The events of that night surfaced as she punched him in the face. Elijah grabbed her around the waist, pulling her back. Hank growled. 3 claw marks now ran across his neck. "Just calm down Hank," Aaron said as Fiona ran over to her brother. "Easy there Red, calm down," Elijah said, not releasing his hold on her waist. "Let go of me Elijah, tell him to keep away from me or I'll tear him to shreds," she spat. "You weren't so brave that night," Hank taunted through the mind link. Her eyes were silver as she glared at him with hatred. "Let go off me Elijah," she growled. He felt the alpha command radiate off her but it didn't work on him. Everyone else stepped back uncertain of what was happening, all realizing the power of her command. "Come on Hank, let's go," Fiona said, dragging her brother away. "This isn't over, you're going to pay for these scratches." Hank's words entered Scarlet's mind before he let Fiona lead him away. "I'll take her inside, best to call it a night," Elijah said to the others before heading inside. He was impressed with her strength as she struggled in his arms. "Calm down Red. Don't tell me what to do. I'm going to kill him," she snapped as Elijah lifted her and threw her over his shoulder, pinning her arms to her waist as his one arm wrapped around her. "You can't threaten to kill a pack member Scarlet, no matter how much they irritate you," Elijah said, his voice sharp. She felt his alpha aura emanating from him and felt it weigh on her. She growled in return. "Don't try to command me." He shook his head, carrying her to her room. Finding the door locked, he headed to his own room. Opening the door, he entered, ignoring her struggling and kicking. He shut the door before their parents heard the commotion and dumped her on the bed. She glared at him about to get off the bed, but Elijah held her by her shoulders and pinned her down. "Calm down, Red, what happened?" he asked. She was a feisty firework, but there was always a reason for her annoyance, he knew that much. "Don't get in my business," she growled. "I'm your alpha, it's my job to keep my pack in check. How can I help if you won't tell me what happened?" he replied, exasperated. "I don't care, now get off me," she warned. "Not until you're calm." Struggling, she aimed a kick at him. He was fast. In a flash he had her pinned down, sitting on her thighs, restricting her legs as he glared down at her. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Red," he said, his eyes darkening. She frowned, her anger fading as she became aware of their position. Her stomach fluttered. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, she looked at him with her green eyes. "Okay, I'm calm, now let me go," she said calmly, trying not to glare at him. His blue eyes met hers and her heart skipped a beat. What was that emotion in them? Her heart hammered when she saw his gaze fall to her lips. "Elijah, get off me," she whispered. He looked into her eyes, not missing her softer tone. "Call me crazy, but don't tell me you haven't thought about it," he whispered, leaning closer. He was not sure if it was the excessive alcohol in his system that made him speak his thoughts, or seeing her pinned beneath him. Never had he ever seen a woman looking more appealing than the feisty woman beneath him. He wanted her to taste the honeyed sweetness of her mouth, to feel her skin against him. "Elijah, this is wrong." The ache only growing as her heart thudded. "Like I said, when it comes to me, there's no rules," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear was awarded by a sharp intake of breath. Her racing heart loud in his ear, her intoxicating scent clouding his senses mixed with the heavenly scent of her. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.